All right, this is for section 7.5 in your pre-algebra text on interest. It's most actually deals with what's called simple interest. It's not what the banks use. The banks use compound interest. But you can calculate simple interest for yourself if you want to give a loan or something to somebody, a family or private party. And so you have to learn to just do this basic formula. And the simple interest formula, it's on page 542. It's interest equals principal times rate times time. I equals PRT. I stands for interest. P stands for the principal. That's the amount of money either that you're saving or borrowing. And the rate is the percentage in a decimal form. So you're going to want to move that percent to a decimal by moving decimal. And T stands for time, and that's usually in years. Sometimes there might be a simple interest formula where you'd say, nope, I want to do it in months or days. That's kind of loan sharking. But for basic simple interest, it's in years. So that's the formula. I equals PRT, principal times rate times time. So this is just a multiplication problem. So I can try one. It says example 1 on page 542. How much simple interest is earned if $1,200 is invested at 4% per year for 5 years? So you're going to use the formula I equals PRT. We're looking for the interest. So our I equals the principal, which is $1,200, times the rate, and the rate is 4%. So we're going to change that to 0.04, right? 0.04. Remember, if we take 4%, we got to move the decimal 2 places to the left to get it to be 0.04. And then we're going to times it by 5 for the number of years. So this is just straight up multiplication, 1,200 times 0.04 times 5, where the interest is going to equal $240. So not really difficult math, and you can use your calculators for this to make it faster. Now, if you're asked to find the balance of your account after the interest, then you have to remember to add this back to your principal. Your balance is going to equal your principal plus your interest. So you would add that $1,200 plus $240 to answer that it would be $1,440 total in the account. So that's using the simple interest formula. We can do another calculation that kind of steps it up just a notch in regards to what if we have a portion of a year instead of just a full year or 5 years or whatever the problem may ask for. Sometimes they do it in months, so you'd want to remember to do that as a fractional portion of your year. A new slide and do example 2 on page 543. A contractor borrows $5,000 at 4.5% per year. The interest accrued is simple interest. The duration of the loan is 6 months. How much will the contractor have to pay back at the end of a 6-month loan period? So we still use interest equals principal times rate times time. So our interest is going to equal our principal, which is $5,000, times our rate, which is 0.045, because we're going to move that decimal, right, 2 places to the left. And then times the time. We want to default that time is in years. We're not loan sharks necessarily. It didn't say it was per month. So 6 months out of a year is 6 over 12, isn't it? Or half a year, right? That's the same as 1/2 of a year if we simplify that. Or we could use the decimal equivalent of 0.05 or 0.5. So we'd have 5,000 times 0.045 times 0.5. So we're going to do that calculation with our calculator, and we end up with $112.50. And then if we have to answer back how much do we actually have to pay back, it would be the $5,000 plus the $112.50. So our final answer would be $5,112.50. So hopefully that particular problem makes sense. The only trick in is that it was 6 months out of 12. You can do that with any month's problem. You can put it over 12 and get your fractional equivalent or your decimal equivalent of the amount of year that it is. So like example 3 on page 544 says a business owner takes out a 4-month loan. So 4 out of 12, that's going to equal 1 out of 3, isn't it? Or 0.3 repeated if you use the decimal equivalent. So you could still use the formula I equals PRT, I equals principal times rate times time, but for your time you're going to use a third or 0.3 repeated. So watch out for those months problems and make sure to put them over 12. You can also go backwards and use some basic algebra to figure out any one of these variables. Like if you're given the interest owed, you can figure out the principal, and that's like in example 3. It says a business owner takes out a 4-month loan at 5.4% per year, simple interest. At the end of the 4-month loan, the interest owed is $90. What was the principal? So we're looking for P. So we're going to plug in everything we know. 90 is the interest owed. We don't know the P. We know the R is 0.054 because we're taking that 5.4% and moving the decimal 2 places to the left. And our time is 1/3 or 0.333333333. So if we multiply all this out, we get 90 equals 0.018 P. And we know now to get P by itself, we have to divide by 0.018 on both sides. And we can do that in our calculator, and P would equal $5,000. P is principal in this particular formula, not percent. P, the principal, means that they borrowed $5,000. So you can use this formula to find any one of the variables using your basic algebra skills. Example 4, bottom of page 544, says a pet shop owner borrows $8,000 for 6 months. At the end of the 6-month period, the interest owed is $200. What was the simple interest rate? So now we're going to look for R. So we put in what we know. The interest owed was $200. The principal P was $8,000. We don't know R. And the time was 6 months out of 12, right? 6 out of 12 months, which is a half, or 0.5. So we're going to have 200 equals 0.5 times 8,000, which is 4,000. Half of 8,000 is 4,000 R, right? 200 equals 4,000 R. We're going to divide by 4,000 on both sides to isolate that R, get the R by itself. And 200 divided by 4,000 is going to be 1/20, and then we could do the division as a decimal, and 1 divided by 20 is actually 0.05, and then we need to remember that it's a percent, so we want to move the decimal 2 places to the right and answer this as a percent, which is 5%. So you can find any one of the variables by doing some basic algebra, plugging in what the problem is giving you and then solving for the unknown, isolating that variable by doing the multiplicative inverse, doing some division once you simplify it out. And then remember, if you're looking for the rate, you have to change that rate back to a percent by moving the decimal 2 places to the right. They extend the simple interest formula on page 5 5 to remind you that that the balance is the principal plus interest. So they say, well, if A is the balance, it equals principal plus interest. And then you could plug in and say, well, the amount, the balance, equals your principal plus PRT, because interest would be principal times rate times time. Then they factor out these two P's, and the amount would equal principal times 1 plus RT. And you could use this formula to find the total amount if you didn't want to add it back at the end of the problem. I leave this to students' discretion if they'd like to use it. It still works. You could use the simple interest formula and then add or subtract back, or you could use this particular formula and plug everything in and figure out what your balance owing is. So for example, like on example 5, on page 546, if $4,000 is invested at 6.25% simple interest, what will be the balance after 2 years? So A would equal the principal 4,000, open paren, times 1, plus the rate, which is 0.0625, times 2 for 2 years. So you do your math on the inside of your parens first, right? You're going to do the multiplication and then add 1. And then you would finally multiply it times the 4,000, and in the end you'd have $4,500. So what it's doing is just having you do all the work in one particular equation rather than finding the simple interest and then adding it back to the principal. So you decide what you'd like to do. Try this formula if you'd like, or just find simple interest and then add it back. It's up to your discretion. It works the same way if you have to do a loan and borrow, which is an example on page 547. You just plug in all the information. You can take a look at that, and you would use this formula to just find your simple interest, add it back to your principal. So that's the end of section 7.5 on interest. That should get you through all those story problems. Remember, simple interest formula is the amount of interest equals the principal times the rate times the time. The time is in years, so remember that if you get months, you need to put that over 12 to get your portion of a year, correct? So some of the problems might be in months, like 4 months or 6 months, and you want to make sure to get that fractional equivalent of a year. So that's it for 7.5. We'll see you in the video for 7.6.